Lots of folks back east, they say, is leaving home every day and beating the hot old dusty way to the California line. Across the desert sands they roll, trying to get out of the old dust bowl. They think they're going to a sugar bowl, but here's what they find.
Moving forward into the early 2000s, we, as an organization, we were, covering a lot of the same things that we all remember from those time periods. I feel like that decade kind of kicked off with the 1999 WTO protests in Seattle, which there was also an episode about.
They really underestimated the extent to which these rules that they've been imposing for the last 25 years have begun to impact many different sectors of not only our society, but societies around the world in many different areas that never used to talk to each other. Labor never used to sit down with environmental groups or human rights groups. Women's groups didn't used to sit down with environmental groups. And suddenly they're all out there in the streets, and really not so suddenly. It's something that has been evolving. And the WTO became a lightning rod for that, because they are the enforcers of these rules. They're completely undemocratic. They're completely non-responsive to ordinary human discourse. And so it brought all these forces together and creates a tremendous potential, it seems to me, for a very different kind of movement that I hope we'll see in the near future.
Organizing in Los Angeles, way up in Boston, Pittsburgh, PA, out to California, all over the Americas, and to Chicago way, 'cause everybody's organizing against the FTA, 'cause everybody's organizing against the FTA.
Of course, the post-9/11 wars under Bush and everything that came with that.
1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want George Bush's war. 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't want George Bush's war.
We're on Devon Avenue, which is the heart of the Pakistani neighborhood in Chicago, and we're here to protest against the insane drive to war that's currently overcoming our country. The teachers that I work with, which is at a mixed race, largely immigrant high school, are outraged about the war. We see that we don't have enough resources to teach, and yet billions of dollars of resources are being funneled off into a war that doesn't serve a purpose except to increase the U.S.'s control of oil. And we see the local effects. That is, every day there are immigrant kids that don't show up in school, that are being driven out, by immigrant registrations, things like that. And many of my coworkers are against it. And so I'm here to represent the voice of, organized labor against the war.
And to say no to the evil, to the axis of oil. No axis of oil. No axis of oil. My dear brothers and sisters and friends, I am from Baghdad, and I know what war is about. And one single glance at what we see today, we are losing the Iraqi children by the number 264 child every single day. What more Mr. Bush wants from us to give? What more than what we are giving? We need peace, we need justice, and no war and no life for oil.
There's just been a tremendous amount of work done in the recent period by U.S. Labor Against the War and people who are part of it, their affiliates, to get a resolution opposed to the war, calling for the rapid withdrawal of U.S. troops through the AFL-CIO convention in the summer of 2005. That was just a tremendous piece of work to get that done. The amount of education, the amount of conversation throughout the labor movement that was needed to bring that about. It certainly was aided quite a bit by the bringing over the delegation of Iraqi trade unionists representing 3 major labor organizations in Iraq. They toured throughout the country and were able to bring directly, worker to worker, labor leader to labor leader, the stories of what was going on there and why it was not helpful to the Iraqi labor movement, to the Iraqi people, to continue the U.S. occupation. And it was those stories of the Iraqi trade unionists here that allowed labor leaders in this country to really give a full assessment of what was going on and make the decision that this war was not what the Bush administration claimed it was.
One of the things about Larry was that he was, unlike anybody who was covering news events, he wanted to, meet people where they were, talk politics with them, and help them in their organizing by, doing a story about their work. One of those was the organization Iraq Veterans Against the War, and Larry edited a piece called Chicago Occupied, which was a performance art piece, if you think about it, that Iraq Veterans Against the War were doing on the streets of Chicago, and I'll let the piece speak for itself.
Don't shoot me! Don't stand up! Stand up! Stand up!
This is simulating a true patrol down the streets of Iraq and in the cities of Iraq. And this is actual participants are all actual Iraq veterans and Iraq war veterans, and they're bringing their own personal experiences here home to the town of Chicago to show the Chicago people what it was really like for them.
Go! Go, Norty! Let's do it! Let's do it! Let's go! What we just did today was Operation First Casualty. We did Operation First Casualty because of disconnect. There's a huge disconnect between what's going on in Iraq and in the occupied lands of Iraq and here in the United States. And we want to bring a little bit of that reality home. We want to wake up our culture and move them to end this war.
As you guys have gone through, what kind of looks, what kind of reactions have you seen from people so far?
It's a mixed. Of course, there's some people that are busy on their way to work, but we are getting a lot of reaction and some positive support. We're also passing out literature to make it really clear what we're doing here today.
Do you think you're kind of freaking some people out when they see this happen spontaneously?
Well, I do think some people are surprised because I think the coverage of the media has so cleansed and made the war seem so far removed from people's day-to-day experiences that that's part of our point, is to really bring the truth, the real realities of what the war is like here. It's not about democracy and liberation. It's about brutal repression of an occupied people for oil and empire. And that's why we need to show this to the American people, and that's why we're here today.
In, right around the time that I was getting involved with the organization was a massive immigrant rights movement that cropped up in 2006 in response to a bill at the time that would have, it was a really anti-immigrant bill, and that resulted in, literally millions of people in the streets.
The creativity of science and displays is demonstrated by these variations on the theme of the Statue of Liberty.
Estamos aquí porque queremos legalización para los inmigrantes. I was born here in the U.S. My parents were immigrants. My dad is he works for the union, Unite, and yeah, that's why I'm here. Por eso estoy aquí, to support my people. I'm here to help them, I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm not an immigrant. My dad, my mom were immigrants. My sister, my other sister, they crossed the borders, walking, Rio Grande, Rio Bravo. It's a very bad situation right now. We need a reform today, as soon as possible.
Larry edited a full half-an-hour episode called "The Penthouse of Heaven," based on this quote from Jorge Mujica, an organizer, in the beginning of it.
We are going for the legalization of the 12 million undocumented workers. That's pretty clear. The way we put it here in Chicago is that we don't want heaven. We want the penthouse of heaven. We want everything and more than everything.
This was another one of Larry's talents. What do you do when you have like 700 episodes? Again, not all of them were content we made, but the vast majority were, and they all had to have a title that was not used already. And so things like Showdown in Company Town, Trainwreck of Ideologies, The Penthouse of Heaven, were Larry's sort of poetic translations of what was being covered and what he was editing in his videos. Yeah, if we did, I think, 10 episodes about the Staley struggle, in 2013, when he counted for the document that he wrote about the history of our organization, we had already done at that point 30 episodes about various aspects of the struggle against privatization and neoliberal policies in public education. Everything from the sort of yearly attempts by Chicago Public Schools to shut down a bunch of schools which it felt they change the reasons every single year. Is it underutilized? Is it a failing school, et cetera? There was also attempts to create military academies in certain wings of public schools.
Okay. Uh-oh. All right, I better look good.
You're behind the cadets, huh? You're behind the cadets.
Oh, I feel good about that.
All right.
Schools are for learning, not for recruiting.
Mayor Daley, you're following Senator.
That's a good one, Dick.
It's true.
He just okay. It's fine, yeah, it's a month and a half, 2 months ago.
They've got him up there already.
These ladies here are very proud to be here today.
The Board of Education, with Pentagon money, has decided to put a military academy here in Senn High School at the expense of the Senn High School program. And this will be one of the 6 military academies that the city is planning under Renaissance 2010. With the recruitment of kids from 6th grade up in the middle schools, Chicago has become the most highly militarized school system in the country. So this is one prong of opposing militarization of education. And for this particular military academy, it was put in without community input. The community very much opposes this military academy.
And this coincided with a plan from a pro-corporate group in Chicago called Renaissance 2010 that was designed that by 2010 they would have closed 100-something schools and replaced them with all these privatized charter schools. And what we know today as the attempts to charterize a lot of public schools was a fight that began in sort of the laboratory of Chicago. But what most affected it was the fact that the community, specifically the Chicago Teachers Union, was fighting back. But it wasn't, the union itself wasn't fighting back very hard, which of course is why a small faction of teachers that were against this kind of stuff formed a new caucus in their union called CORE, the Caucus of Rank and File Educators.
Suppose you're working a different shift from your husband. When do you all see each other? When do you have time for your family? But if you don't make time for that private school, that charter school, what are they going to do to your son or daughter? What happens if your son or daughter has a meltdown because things are difficult? Because sometimes there are. Do they have social workers and counselors to help them get through the hard times?
What another aspect of reaching out to people and sort of helping them with organizing was a massive effort that Larry was involved in the past several years, because he saw the transit unions as vitally important, much in the way that public sector unions like teachers were reinvigorating the labor movement, because the labor that they performed was so directly connected to the community that they served, and therefore they were much more likely to get massive community support for any kind of contract campaigns or strikes or whatever. Larry rightfully understood that that our transit unions that actually get us to work every single day could also be playing that role. And so he worked with a man named Eric Slater a lot, who was, still is, a CTA bus driver here in Chicago, and who has always been really active in his union. And this particular video was called "CTA Fired Me and Made Me into an Organizer."
It's been quite a battle this year. I was elected 2 years ago to be the executive board member and union steward for this bus garage here behind me, North Park Bus Garage. About a year in, immediately it was a war with management, and also, unfortunately, some of the union bureaucrats on top of the union, who have since been removed from office by election. When I was being approached by a coworker and asked a question about the contract, I then gave a cease and desist order to management to stop breaking the contract. And then the next day or the day after, I was removed from service as a bus operator, my 10 years as a bus operator, and fired shortly thereafter. Now, immediately when this happened, we went to battle, as we know how in the social justice communities, in the working class struggles of 100, 200 years. You make it public, you make it broad, and you try to build consciousness. So weeks went by, we had another press conference. We had a major demonstration. Months went by, we had a demonstration with the Chicago Teachers Union leading a one-day strike that had some parts of a general strike. The Fight for 15 movement, and some of the workers at McDonald's and others were on strike as well, which we actually was on strike at the location just down the street. So a demonstration of 100 or more, mostly immigrant workers, came to support me and the workers of Chicago Transit Authority in our struggle right in front of this work location. They were scared. They had all the cops out here and everything, thought we were going to stop this entrance here, which we could have, and we may in the future if we have to. These buses provide so much public service. That's what they were really afraid of. And that was the beginning of making it clear to the employer. They make this illegal action by removing an elected executive board member from the union, removing the union from the property would actually be worse for them because we would go public, and we did.
He talks about the press conferences that were held that Labor Beat recorded and made videos of, and how those videos were going viral and getting lots of hits, and that resulted in him getting basically all the union officers except the president to come with him to the newest press conference, and when his coworkers in CTA uniforms expressed support, that emboldened the leadership to feel okay with supporting this struggle. And like I said, he got his job back, and so it really was a direct result of the work that Larry had done with him and his labor video. Some of the last clips I want to show are from recent last year. Academic worker struggles. Larry didn't have any. Larry, a lifelong socialist, had a strong class understanding and didn't regard, like there are some people out there that regard, academia as the ivory tower and outside of the working class and whatnot. But it's like, try telling that to the GEO, the Graduate Employees Organization at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, or the GSU at University of Chicago. And so this is a clip from when they had a rally right before they were going to do a vote on whether or not there was going to be a union at their university.
I feel like I've been in the union since 2013. I'm a sixth year now. One of the major sleights of hand that the university is trying to pull over all of us is we are lucky to be here. We are so lucky to be at this fancy-ass university, right? Why? Why are we so lucky to be here? We're so lucky to be here because people like us made this university great. Because people like us did the research that made UChicago rise in the freaking rankings. It's not this administration, it's us, our precursors. And it makes me think, I'm the first person in my family who's doing a PhD, and my family is super proud of me. But my mother, who's been a teacher her whole life, in talking to me, she realized that, wow, it's really funny. You're at this elite university that is world-renowned, and you find yourself in the same spot as I was, And that is insane to me. It is insane to me that this sleight of hand has worked on us somehow. That we have somehow managed to see ourselves as privileged, but we will not let that happen anymore. We need a seat at the table. We need to negotiate. We need a voice. And no number of emails telling us there is already a special relationship is gonna change that feeling that we need to have when we go to the ballot box. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna vote yes. What are we gonna do? Vote yes. Yes, yes.
I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win.
One of Larry's final two videos that he edited were a protest in front of a railroad company executives meeting, and the unions were out there protesting because of safety issues on the railroads. And he edited a piece that I shot about immigrant workers and the Me Too movement, and how sexual harassment on the job by fast food workers and housekeeping workers was sort of colliding with the immigrant rights movement, and there was a panel discussion that was covered there, and he edited it really masterfully. But one of his other last projects really was to create a new 4-page document that also talked about the history of labor media, that he really wanted to get into the hands of unions and rank-and-file union activists everywhere. It was called The Road Ahead for Labor Media, Chicago and Nationally. And he called it an invitation to the labor movement to help devise new media strategies. He was talking about how there's a creeping trend of what we thought was going to be finally our big way to get our voice out, social media and an online video. And he's noting this creeping trend of censorship by those companies of controversial ideas. Yeah, some of it deservedly so against the right wing, but a lot of times, it doesn't take much for those kind of efforts to lock out progressive and labor voices, and that's what he was concerned about. He was really sort of doubling down on the idea that workers and their organizations need to make their own media. I don't make this comparison lightly, but Larry Duncan was involved in the production and documentation of labor struggles and media around those struggles his entire adult life. And if I had to make like, okay, who's the holy trinity of like old white dudes who did labor media? It's Haskell Wexler and Studs Terkel and Larry Duncan, and I really look forward to being able to further document and make available the massive body of work that he created over the years, and hope that can be useful to filmmakers, authors, researchers, etc., that want to delve into this documentation of history. Now, the ghost of Larry Duncan's on my shoulder, so like, careful, man. Corporations love to get a hold of that stuff for nothing. So the same policies that he had in life would still be in effect. We're going to like veto you if you're ABC News or something like that. But to make this body of work somehow available for the bulk of us, that deserve to inherit it, is going to be our goal as we also continue to produce labor media in his memory, documenting the struggles of our world and trying to help make it better. So, thanks a lot for coming today.
I'll sing this song, but I'll sing it again, of the place that I lived on the West Texas plains, in the city of Pampa, the county of Gray. Here's what all of the people there say: well, it's so long, it's been good to know you, so long.